Last week we looked at how Jesus was given two false trials, show trials, whatever you want to call them. First from the high priest and a few of the other Jewish leaders, and then from the Sanhedrin. And of course, we talked, both of them were completely against the law in things that they did, the way they did everything. And all of that, even with false witnesses, they still couldn't prove Jesus was guilty of what they were charging him with. But they got the people riled up enough that by that all of the Sanhedrin, or most of the Sanhedrin and those in there, to go ahead and just decide that they want him killed. But they did not have the power or authority to put Jesus to death. So the Romans would have to do this for him, for them. They would have to find a way to get the Romans to punish Jesus. So now they must convince the Romans to put Jesus to death. That is what we're going into today. We're going to look at two different, quote, trials or hearings, or whatever you might call them, as we will see. And I just thought about this while I was studying through it. When you compare it to today, you have people that are going through our court systems, especially for a death sentence. It may take 15 years. I mean, the trials sometimes takes 2 or 3 years, and then they go through the appeals for years and years and years before the death sentence is ever carried out. And here they're doing every bit of this in like 6 hours, because he's going to be on the cross by 9 a.m. We don't know exactly when it started, but it was sometime during the night. So, it could have been 6, 8, maybe 10 hours, but no more than that we see all of this taking place. The Jewish charges against Jesus would have absolutely no bearing whatsoever on the Romans. The Romans cared less about what the Jews thought of Jesus. So they must find a way to convince the Romans that Jesus had done something against Roman law, against the Romans. So they came to Pilate, who was the Roman leader there of that area, and they brought 3 charges. First one was perverting the nation. And this would have been what you might say, actions that would have weakened the Roman authority in the area. Forbidding to give tribute to Caesar. And this was just, they said, well, he's been convincing the people not to pay the taxes to the Romans. And then saying that he himself is Christ a king. And what this charge is he is trying to overthrow the Roman government by saying he is the king. Now, of course, all of these, as they are listed, are false. Jesus never promoted any of these things, even though he did admit he is king. He's going to be the king. He admits that now. But the only kingdom that he is advocating for is the kingdom of God. He is having nothing to do with the earthly kingdom as they see. I also thought it was interesting, and you've heard me say this, you've heard other preachers say this, that the Jewish people were looking for their Messiah to come overthrow Rome. So the charges that they are charging Jesus with are actually three things they want the Messiah to come and do. They all want the Messiah to come back and to do all these things and overthrow Rome. So they're charging Jesus for exactly what they want to see, but did not. As we go on, I want to read from John 18:33 through 37. And this fills in a lot more about verse 3. If y'all don't mind, I'm going to kill a spider. It's little and black, so I hope it wasn't. We don't have black widows. John 18, starting at verse 33. Then Pilate entered into the judgment hall again and called Jesus and said unto him, Art thou the King of the Jews? Jesus answered him, Sayest thou this thing of thyself, or did others tell it thee of me? Pilate answered, Am I a Jew? Thy own nation and the chief priest have delivered thee unto me. What hast thou done? Jesus answered, My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from hence. Pilate therefore said unto him, Art thou a king then? Jesus answered, Thou sayest that I am a king. To this end was I born, and for this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. Every one that is of the truth heareth my voice. So what we see there, the important thing is Jesus admitted that what he was, who he was, what he had come for. And Pilate says, I find no fault in this man. So the Jews try to widen, I'll say it this way, widen the conspiracy a little bit is what they're trying to do, and to find some way, somehow, that they can convict him. When Pilate heard Jesus was from Galilee, he thought that he had found a way out of this situation. We see this as Herod Antipas, who was the Jewish governor over the Galilean area. And if you remember a little history of this Herod, he is son of Herod the Great, the one who tried to kill Jesus when he was a baby, when he had all the children under 2, all the boys under 2 in Bethlehem killed. But this Herod also is the one who killed John the Baptist over what John the Baptist said about he and his wife, who should not have been his wife, who was his niece, who had been married to his brother, and he stole her away. And that John had criticized him for that. That's what got him killed. So Pilate sent Jesus to Herod so that he could judge Jesus, because Jesus was a citizen of Galilee. Now, Herod did not live in Jerusalem, but he, as many, many other Jews from all over the land and the world there in that area, were in Jerusalem for the Passover. So Herod was excited to see Jesus. He had been wanting to see Jesus because he had been, if you remember, he really was intrigued by John the Baptist. He did not want to put John the Baptist to death, but he had to because of the promise he had made his wife's daughter. So he had now heard of all about Jesus for over 3 years. Being the governor of Galilee, there probably wasn't a thing Jesus did in public that he did not hear about. And he wanted to see Jesus do some miracles. What he's wanting is a show. That's what he is really wanting. He's wanting to see Jesus do some great miracle. But Jesus knew, and Jesus wouldn't even talk to him, would not answer his questions. The scribes and the priests just piled on charges after charges, and Jesus said not a word. So Herod's men dressed him as a king, and then they made fun of him. Probably beat him some too, as they had done in the former trial. So Pilate and Herod had been at odds with each other for some reason. We are not told why that was. But now this common problem has brought them together, back together as friends, I guess, from then on. Since Pilate's plan to put it off on Herod failed, then he's got to come up with a different plan. So he called all of the Jewish leaders back in, and he said, "You brought this man to me to be judged. And you brought many treasonous charges, things against him. And I've examined him. I've heard y'all. I've heard the witnesses. I've heard everything. But you brought no evidence to convict him of these crimes that you say that he committed. So I'm going to find him not guilty." That's what Pilate believed. He is trying to do what's right here up until this point. So I cannot find him guilty of anything that deserves death. Herod could not find him guilty of anything that made him deserve death. So now we see Herod or Pilate start slipping. So what I'm going to do, instead of just freeing him the way that I should, I'm going to punish him. And then I'll release him. This is his compromise. Where do we get compromise like that? We get that from somebody being a coward and not standing up and doing what he knows was right. I'll have him beaten, which is being scourged, which is what they did anyway, which almost killed him. And can kill many of the people that they scourge the way they do. They die before they ever even get them to the cross. It was I won't go through the details because it's terrible. He hopes that this will satisfy the people. If you think about it, what it really is, his plan is to torture an innocent man, but then release him. So verse 17 tells us of a tradition to release a prisoner at the Passover season. This was something that evidently had been done in Jewish tradition and then was kept over and held over by the Romans just to, I guess, to try to please them. So Pilate tried to convince them that he was going to free Jesus as for this to fulfill this plan. Because the other one that he had in mind was a really dangerous man, a man who had been a murderer. He had tried to overthrow the government, and I'll give you Jesus instead of him. But no, they don't want that. They would rather Jesus be put to death than this murder. They'd rather let a murderer back out on the street. They cried out, "Crucify him, crucify him." And I can only imagine, I'm not there, but I can only imagine these people are screaming to the top of their lungs. They're in a blind rage of hatred that they have just built up over time. But then once they got into this mob mentality, and I've talked a little bit about that, and we see it in our world today when they have these protests where, and I'm going to be charitable here. Possibly, probably they were designed to be, quote, peaceful protests. But then the people get enraged, and that's when you see them turning over the police cars and firebombing police cars with policemen in them and burning down their buildings of innocent people in their own cities. And I just imagine that's what kind of rage these people had gotten into. When you get in that group, and I can preach a whole nother message right now going on to that. Be careful about what groups you get into, because those groups have an effect upon you. An effect, I'm sure that probably many of these men would never have thought about this or been in favor of this on their own. If the whole process had not happened the way it had happened, if you had just come to these men, they would have given you an idea of, I disagree with Jesus about things, but he seems like a nice man. He needs to learn our ways more, stuff like that. They would have never been in this kind of rage if it had not been for that group. So we see this again. He's innocent. I will punish him and release him. The Jews got louder and louder. And honestly, what happened, it scared Pilate. They're the way they were. And now Pilate has his soldiers with him. Pilate's not scared they're going to hurt him physically. What he's scared about is they're going to cause a riot, or they're going to go to Rome, they're going to go to his supervisor, superior, and they're going to get him in trouble. That's what he's worried about. He doesn't want to get fired. He's got a pretty good job, and he hopes to move up in the Roman government, over the years. So that's what he's scared of. That's what all this is about. It's about his position, about what he has. So we see Pilate releases Barabbas and sentences Jesus. The innocent will be crucified, and the guilty will be set free. When we look back at our scripture today, I guess if you had to ask, what is your thought about this? One word that came to my mind would be injustice. It's total injustice. An innocent man was brought to court, and it was found that he was innocent. But they sentenced him to death anyway. I mean, how much bigger injustice could there be? If they had witnesses that did condemn him and brought up a good show, and they condemned, and convicted him, which happens occasionally in our court systems today, at least then you could have said, well, they were just following through what the evidence said. But the evidence, there was no evidence that would convict him. As I said, many people have been convicted falsely, but there's usually evidence. Now, it may be false, but there's evidence. But then the other thing about it is, no one has ever been falsely convicted who was innocent the way Jesus was innocent. Jesus was absolutely, perfectly innocent, never committed any sin whatsoever. Pilate knew it, but he fell to the pressure. In Matthew 27, we read verse 19. When he was set down on the judgment seat, his wife sent unto him, saying, Have thou nothing to do with that just man? For I have suffered many things this day in a dream because of him. And then down to verse 24. When Pilate saw that he could prevail nothing, but that rather a tumult was made, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. See ye to it. Then answered all the people and said, His blood be on us and on our children. Then released he Barabbas unto them, and when he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Pilate's washing of his hands did nothing to release him from the guilt. And that is the guilt of murder of an innocent man. That's what he was guilty of. He had an innocent man murdered. Nor did anything release these Jewish leaders from their guilt by conspiracy. They had a conspiracy to have Jesus murdered. In our world over the last almost 2,000 years, this fact of what the Jewish people did has been used by many, and I will say falsely, unjustly, to hate Jewish people. I know it's been mentioned in this church before, but I mean, anytime that Jewish people are persecuted or hated or discriminated against, you will hear, but they murdered Christ. Hitler used that. Hitler studied during the early part of his reign, during the 30 before the war. He studied it and he used that hatred, built up hatred of the Jewish people because they had killed Christ. Many people, they're still using it today. And I thought about it. The Sanhedrin had, and my mind just went blank, it was 70-some members of the Sanhedrin. I can't remember, 77. The high priest was there, the high priest father-in-law, who was the former high priest. And there would have been a few of the other Jewish officials there, and then some of the Jewish guards there, their guards they had. But there may not have been more than 200, maybe a little bit more than that, Jews who were involved in this whole thing. But yet we're going to punish the whole Jewish nation and the Jews that are born for the next 2,000 years for what that one group did. But now these were guilty of what they did. These people did this on their own free will, the ones who did it. As I said, I believe they were, many of them, influenced by the mob. They could have got up, walked out. They could have resisted, but they didn't. God knew this would happen. He knew exactly what would happen. As Jesus said, he could have stopped it. He could have brought legions of angels. He could have stopped it at any time. God the Father could have stopped it at any time. The Holy Spirit could have stopped it at any time. But they did not do that. It was used to accomplish what God knew had to be done for the redemption of men and women throughout all eternity. The only true one to ever live, the only truly innocent person to ever live, was sentenced to death. And why was it? Why did this happen? It happened so the guilty could go free. And that is each and every one of us. Now, Barabbas got the gift of a lifetime when he was set free. But that wasn't the reason. The reason was so that you and I could be set free. So that everyone who has lived, everyone that's still living today. So as we close, we'll get ready for a hymn of invitation. I just ask, have you been set free? That's the question. Anyone. That gift to be set free is available to each and every one of us. If you've never trusted Jesus, if you've never been born again, if you've never been set free, come today. Call upon Him. Let Him set you free today. Page 81.